Hey everyone, my name is Amber Dean, and I help write the show notes for the Re-Engineered You. So for this episode, Joe and Todd actually put some hardcore faith in me and let me help create the initial outline. Overall, this was a pretty awesome experience, and I really hope you enjoyed it. And for the record, I'm not an expert on anything either, but I certainly do have opinions.
In July of 1782, Molly was forced to dig a musket ball out of his own thigh. Then again, every man in Molly's light infantry was known for being tough. In the time of the Revolutionary War, George Washington's light infantry wasn't called light because the men were small. Actually, it was the opposite. Men of the light infantry had to be 5 foot 5 inches at least. They had to be brave, since they were sent into skirmishes with light packs and very few supplies. They were extra strong, so they could march fast and steady to be wherever they were needed in the Hudson Valley. And they were tough as nails, which is pretty damn tough, considering old nails were basically tiny railroad spikes. But even for the light infantry, Molly was exceptional. When he took 2 British musket balls to the thigh and a sword gash to the head, Molly simply excused himself to go deal with it alone, without the aid of a doctor. And he rambled that shit out of his leg with a penknife, except for one lead ball that had to stay in and heal over because it was just too deep. The other infantrymen let Molly do this because he had something to prove. Molly had slightly effeminate features and couldn't grow a beard. But the real reason for Molly sewing up his own wound was to avoid being found out. Because Molly, who had originally signed up for active duty under a man's name, was really Deborah Sampson. At a time where it was illegal for women to be in the battlefield, it was Deborah who served as part of the Continental Army. Deborah, who was given the dangerous task of scouting neutral territory to assess British buildup of men and material in Manhattan. It was secretly Deborah who influenced General George Washington in his command decision. And it's Deborah who deserves a credit for leading 30 infantrymen on an expedition that ended with a one-on-one confrontation with Tories and raiding a Tory home that resulted in the capture of 15 men. It was Deborah who dug trenches, helped storm a British redoubt, and endured cannon fire under the siege of Yorktown. So what motivated Deborah Sampson to step outside of her 1700s woman's role and march into a male-dominated, bullet-rich environment? What made this lion-hearted woman crave action in battle to the point where she sewed her own uniform and took up the rifle to defend her country? One simple yet mighty word: bravery. You're listening to The Re-Engineered You. This is a podcast about self-empowerment and all the myths, lies, and misconceptions we tell ourselves. Then we use science and history to bust those myths and re-engineer a better you. I'm your host, Todd Laments, the extrovert.
And I'm the writer, researcher, and introvert, Joe Anthony. Today's episode was written by our talented blog writer, Amber Dean, without whom our website would probably look like a mad lib of nonsense we've just copied from our show notes. So this is a special thanks to Amber.
None of us are foreign to the concept of bravery. We see it on TV shows and movies all the time, where the courageous hero dives headlong into a burning building. You might have seen bravery firsthand when a friend volunteered without hesitation to check out a mysterious sound while you were camping. Or they show you the pictures of their skydiving expedition But where does bravery come from? Furthermore, why does bravery even exist in evolution? Especially if that mysterious sound turns out to be a grizzly or something deadly that could prune you out of evolution for being too brave. So that's our topic for today, the science of bravery. And to help along, we've got some hardcore myths to bust. Myths like Myth 1. You're either born with a brave bone in your body or you're not. Bravery is an inherent trait that some have. And trying to learn a natural attribute like bravery is just impossible. Myth 2. People performing seemingly brave acts isn't bravery at all. They're just being reckless without any calculation for the risks. Myth 3. Men, by nature, are braver than women. Men have always been the hunters, the warriors, and the sex that puts themselves in harm's way, right? But first, I want to tell Joe about the first time Deborah got caught trying to enroll in the Army and what gave her away. Here's a hint. It's weirder than you think.
So, Molly seems like the more gritty version of Mulan, and because I've seen the cartoon and my brain goes to movies, this sounds a little bit dirtier than Mulan. Like it sounds, the Revolutionary War, when I think of that, I think of like, whiskey and like sewing up a wound with probably dirty thread and things like that.
With a rusted saw.
Right, exactly.
Leather in your mouth.
Yeah, it everything I've ever seen about the Civil War looks kind of like not Civil War, the Revolutionary War. It just looks like one big infection, even the part that isn't infected. So I assume what gave Molly away is, like Mulan, she probably had like a luck dragon following her around and a talking cricket and like a bunch of other cartoon animals.
I will get to that. But for starters, isn't this just a crazy story? I consider myself as almost an expert on American history. I can't believe I never heard of this.
Yeah, I guess that this kind of like breezed past the Ken Burns documentaries that I've been watching because I have not seen this.
It's so much better than those superhero movies. But to get started, on December 17th, 1760, Deborah Sampson was born. And out of 7 siblings, she had the thirst for action, the courageous kind of action, putting herself on the front lines, fighting for her country and what she believed in. Except one small problem got in the way of her getting into that action and fulfilling her heroic duty. Of course, Deborah was a woman. Back in the late 1700s, it was illegal for a woman to join the military and fight for their country alongside people who shared the same goal. In fact, it wasn't until 1979 when the enlisted qualifications became equal for both men and women.
So 1979 isn't exactly as... I was hoping that you were going to say that it was going to be like the 1800s or something when everyone could enlist.
Wouldn't you think that with her heroic battles, and we're going to talk about them soon, that would have been, hey, we need more Deborahs.
Yeah. If anyone is sort of like shaking their head and they think that we're wrong on this one, if you go back and look at the history of U.S. enlistment, it's actually airlines, fighter pilots and people in aviation. So we were allowing women to enlist before that, and other countries kicked our ass as far as like allowing women to fight earlier. We're really late. Like, we are not as progressive as we think. And most of that was because we wanted to put women in pilot seats and let them drop bombs on people.
Now, remember, there's 7 siblings here, and Deborah's family struggled badly financially. Her father abandoned the family, ran off when Sampson was only 5 years old. And then she was sent off to live with a relative. They got separated, and her and 2 of her siblings went, I think it was an aunt. And then the aunt passed away. I don't know how you'd separate who goes which way, right? That'd be a tough one.
Right.
I think they do it in like age bracket. So after her aunt passed away, She was sent to be an indentured servant as a young girl to, it was called Benjamin Thomas, and he was a farmer. And then all the siblings were spread out to different homes. So she was, you know what an indentured servant is. Kind of like a slave, but you get treated a little bit better, right? Am I on?
Right. You're given a period of time where you owe labor for room and board, basically. And then after a period of time, it's so weird. Okay, so to catch people up on a little bit of history, usually indentured servitude was reserved for people who had done crimes. So it's interesting to start a kid out with, you did the crime of being poor and being born, so here, go live with Deacon Benjamin Thomas.
But he gave I guess cash for that? Do you think he paid? What do you got? You got any young, strong kids, smart kids?
I don't remember the exact laws country by country, but I do remember some countries with indentured servitude, they gave them a stipend. But I don't think that was always the case in America. It looks like they taught her to read, right? So maybe that was part of it, is as long as you're educated, sort of.
Well, she got self-educated. And so this farmer he treated her, I would say more, from the reading I did, more like one of his own children. He, as a farmer, he did carpentry, farmed the land, worked with animals, and he taught her all those things. He taught her how to shoot a gun and how to survive.
I want this to be like a movie where he's almost prescient in his teachings. He's like, okay, now here's how to shoot a gun. You may need to know this someday, especially if the British are around. Anyway, shoot at that can.
So like many successful people that we're talking about hundreds of years later, she used time to improve her skills, even though not knowing what she's going to use them for someday. So she used time. Time didn't use her. So at the young age of 18, she was finished with her being an indentured servant for Benjamin Thomas. And then she went and became a teacher. So that's proof that she could read. Between 1779 and 1780. She was an exceptionally strong woman. She was 5'7". So for the time, that's a very tall person. That's actually probably a pretty tall man back then.
So imagine you are sitting in the schoolhouse and a self-taught teacher walks in and she is just twirling a rifle and snapping pencils in front of you, and you're just, I can see why she belonged on the battlefield, maybe.
Yeah, you roll your eyes and she pushes you up against the friggin' wall.
Right. She stuffs you in a locker. I don't think they had lockers back then, but I'm assuming.
They have totes.
Wooden crates.
Now, as an educated woman, she questioned the British's actions at the beginning of the Revolutionary War and as the war went on. Deborah, she wanted to get in. She was morally outraged or politically outraged, right?
Right.
And she wanted to show and prove her patriotism. So she got an idea. She was going to disguise herself as a man. Guess how she was discovered?
How they figured out that she was a woman and not a man. Is it the Mulan theory? Please tell me she had cartoons following her.
Not even close.
Damn.
She was discovered when she was caught holding her pen like a woman.
So she's scratching with the long feathered pen that Edgar Allan Poe used. How do you do that? What is the feminine way of holding a pen?
There isn't anymore. But at one point there was
the masculine way, if anyone's thinking, is to grip it like you're a kid holding a crayon. And if you look like a caveman, they're like, yeah, you're a dude. If you have any style whatsoever, then they're like, that's too feminine.
That's true, though. Men's penmanship is not as good as women's. So after being found out, she was devastated, but not deterred. And she tried again in 1782 and succeeded. She was 21 years old, but she told me she was only 17.
Okay. So she because she was feminine, she's just like, I'm going to tell him a younger age. That's smart.
So Deborah, one of the only women to serve in the army during the Revolutionary War, she disguised herself as a man. She enlisted under the name Robert Shirliffe, and she served a total 18 months.
So I made a joke about all those siblings. Have you ever heard the old practice for like old families of doing like if you have a bunch of siblings, one of them goes into the military, the other one goes into the priesthood, the other one goes into business. Like there's
diversification.
Right. It is odd to me that of her siblings, I don't think she had 7 sisters. So like, why her? Why was she, the brave one? Like, why did she have that in her?
I also think that if her parents were alive, they would have never allowed it. It would have been disgrace to the family.
Right, exactly.
And maybe, that loss of her parents and that feeling of abandonment, she really took to this, her adopted indentured servant dad, and wanted to please him and picked up those skills, wanted to spend time with him.
There could be a huge factor of like, we don't know what her upbringing was specifically. It might be that she was trying to like fit a mold somebody else projected onto her. But as we stated up top at the beginning of the episode, we kind of want to dig into where bravery comes from in the human. Like, one would think that if we are motivated to carry on our genes and to have kids and to gather wealth and to, eat and take care of ourselves, why would anyone ever go to war? Why would anyone be brave if bravery is, in nature? If you're a caveman and you're surviving with like spears, why would you ever be brave ever? Like, why would that ever help you as far as like not being eaten?
Yeah, high risk, big returns are why.
Right.
So you go first.
Yeah, if you are the first one into the cave to poke around for a grizzly bear, you're going to be pruned out of the evolutionary tree. So why would that ever serve you? One of our earliest episodes, we talked about, they were our Hitler Youth. We talked about belonging, how they did tests to see if high risk was an attractive thing for like teens. Were teens riskier than others? That kind of plays into this, the idea that you might risk something to impress your other, tribe members. There's a great article that we're going to link to by phys.org, and it talks about how tribal war may have sort of driven human evolution in pieces, in short periods. I have never heard somebody refer to this, but they talked about belligerence, the aggressiveness that comes with wanting to expand your tribe. They refer to it as altruism. So, like, mostly, I think of altruism as, like, giving change to the mall Santa that's ringing a bell. I don't think of altruism as, like, being willing to go club somebody else in another tribe.
Why do you think they call it that?
Well, in this article, they make the case that in a tribal sense, if you are willing to go club a neighbor and their tribe, that's altruistic because you're opening up new lands to your own tribe. So if like, if I look over and like the next tribe over is like hogging up all the good berries in the berry patch, if I club them to death, now we have berries. So it might be considered altruistic for us to go do that. There's also a lot of theories about how much genetic material a family member carries. So the idea that it's altruistic for you to defend your family. One of my favorite examples of this in this article, they talk about how a scientist was asked, would you dive into a river and risk yourself for a total stranger? And he answers, like, he sits there and they're at a bar, and this scientist looks down, he jots down some quick math on a napkin, and he says, no, I would not dive into a river for a stranger. I would dive into a river for 2 brothers or 8 cousins. And he's
okay.
He's just doing the math on how much genetic material they share with him. So, like, how much are you defending your family by doing this? So if you are, say, surrounded by cousins, and that's what your tribe is made up of, you're probably more willing to go to war for your tribe if you share material with them.
In the olden days, they were at least cousins, right?
Right, exactly. Modern wars, they don't follow the same logic. Like you can't say that any of the, like when you thank a veteran for their service, you're not thanking them because they went over to another country and acquired land and reproductive rights anymore. I mean, the benefits of leaving, the honor and the money to go to war outweigh the cost. Ideally, like that's what they're being paid for. But if the money they bring in from doing it also gets them, say, an education and a down payment on a house, then it's effectively getting them the same thing as tribal warfare, which is it's giving them land and reproductive rights.
I think there'd be more status in the older way because your tribe would get more resources and protection, literally. Because when we send someone over to overseas now, it doesn't always directly affect our life. It does, but we don't know it. We don't notice.
That is true. And if you're living in a tribal, prehistory era, if you see your neighbor take a club, leave, and come back with blood on his club, and suddenly you have a new hut to go to, I mean, that is, you can see who gave you that. That's a little bit of, you get rewarded for that altruism almost directly. So that's one theory of why bravery exists. I want to ask you a couple questions about bravery. What do you consider brave? So the first one I'm going to ask, is James Bond brave?
No. He's just really, really good. He's really, really well trained, and he's really, really cool.
I'm glad you answered that, because I feel the same way. Now, it depends on which Bond we're talking about, because Daniel Craig's Bond seems a little bit more vulnerable and not quite as skilled as, like, Pierce Brosnan or Sean Connery.
I was Sean Connery. That's the only one that even popped into my head.
Yeah, Connery Bond. He is all smoothness and skill. Like, that guy hardly broke a sweat.
Yeah, he's seen it all before. He kind of knows how it's going to play out.
Right. So we're talking about the 4 factors that contribute to bravery. One of them that was identified by Albert Bandura, he coined it self-efficacy, the idea that we are so good at confronting challenges that our bravery comes from our skills. So I'm going to jokingly call that the James Bond bravery, where you're not emotionally brave so much, you are more skills brave. You have the toolkit to confront anything, so you don't have to worry.
I've just had an experience with this, Joe. I go hiking a lot with my wife, and I was concerned about something happened to us and not protecting myself. I usually didn't care, but now they have a new wife. I was worried that something would happen to her, so I was just studying some local places for gun training. And they teach you lots of situational things. So you know what to do. You know how to be brave when this situation happens.
Okay.
And even if you're an ex-military like I am, or even a police officer, if you don't practice these scenarios, you're not going to be brave. You're not going to know what to do because you don't have the skill set. You don't have the structure.
Right. Sometimes bravery can only exist where you've given yourself that toolkit. So you can give yourself that James Bond bravery if you have the right training and you take the right precautions and you practice. Another type of bravery they talk about in here. So bravery number 2 from this article. You have the ability to overcome challenges and assess risky tasks, even in the presence of anxiety. So the idea isn't so much that you have the toolkit, the James Bond of bravery. You just have the ability to assess how likely you are to succeed. And that helps you with, your emotional setup.
Evel Knievel.
Exactly, yeah. That's a good one, Evel Knievel.
What did he succeed 98% of the time or some ridiculous?
Right. It's not that he always had the right skill set. He oftentimes did, but he had never jumped that many buses before.
But he was always doing just jumps, so he had some, experience and reps from that.
Right. Yeah, he knew emotionally he could handle what he was about to do. The third type of bravery is openness to experience. So that's people who are more likely to act in a time of crisis simply because they're more open to new things. So
I get that. The guy with the tattoos and the Jeep, right? He's skydived. He's mountain climbed.
Oh, skydiving. It's funny you mentioned that. That's the one I was thinking of. Like the person in the, at work who was like, I want to go skydiving. It's like, why would you do that? But yeah, it's a type of bravery, just to be open to things.
I'd try anything. I'm a wild man or a wild woman.
Right. One that I tacked on to this article, I got this from Radiolab. Radiolab did an episode about bravery, and they also talked about how much of bravery is protecting your own genetic line. They talked about the not thinking type of courage. They quoted several studies where people who are exceptionally brave just on the spur of the moment. One of their stories was a woman who jumped a fence to fight a bull to save somebody. Those people in functional MRIs are oftentimes found to have not considered the risks at all. They just didn't have that in their thought process. They didn't stop to think. They just acted because they saw somebody who needed help.
You know anybody like that?
I have seen people like that. I've seen people jump into act. I remember I was near Pioneer Square, and I saw somebody fall down, and they had a set of glasses on. One of the lenses cut their eye pretty badly. And somebody on our train, we all were still processing mentally what was happening. They jumped off the train while the doors were closing and went out to help. And I always, that stuck in my mind, that everybody else was still processing. It's not that we weren't less brave or less willing to act. Several people got on their phone and called 911, but this one guy was just instantly off the train. There is a emotional factor to bravery as well, and I wonder how much of this Molly had, because we kind of see, since she was a school teacher and since she had, a big family, she may have had this unique combination. This is from a Men's Health article. It says, this is why some people are braver than others, according to science. They talk about people who have a combination of risk-seeking, generosity, and empathy. So they want that adrenaline, but they also have generosity toward their fellow man and empathy. They say, quote, in this article, quote, "You can be a risk taker and do amazing things, but you may be missing the G factor. That's generosity and altruism." And that's from Frank Farley of Temple University.
Isn't that who we all want to be, though? That tough, brave, but still kind and compassionate person. It gives me goosebumps. It's like the real life hero, the real life comic superhero, right?
Yeah, comic books, you said it. We all want to be Spider-Man. We want to be able to, save somebody out of a burning building and then stop and have a chat with them and be friendly. That generosity that comes with some types of bravery. That is to me, the super admirable quality.
So at a time when women were only allowed to help military by being a nurse or a cook, what do you think Deborah was doing? Do you think she just become a traditional housewife or mother? Educate her kids, manage servants?
I know later she became a mother, and I know that she started as a teacher after being self-educated. So when we talk about people who have a mixture of generosity and empathy with bravery, I'm guessing she's busy fitting that bill, basically doing her superhero origin story.
And I'm going to speak for Joe and the whole re-engineering team that we know women are tougher and braver than men because they're the ones that bear kids.
Right.
So you're right. She went and did all those things. She just did them in a different order. Most people, women don't even have the experience. So she had the experience of doing all those worldly things and then all those war things.
Okay.
Been great to talk to. She's been a fascinating speaker to listen to.
Oh my God. Yeah. Spoiler. She later becomes a public speaker. I would have killed to be in her lecture just to hear what she has to say.
Joe and I would have been in the front row hanging on every word. I promise. So she assumed the identity of the man, I guess the name she made up, Robert Shirtliff. And she was in the 4th Massachusetts Regiment in 1782 to fight for freedom and become an active member of the Continental Army. And she served for 18 months.
Okay.
So now Deborah, as a soldier, had to sleep in a tent with 6 men on a bed made of hay and burlap. Now, which is, for our pilgrim Amish Joe here, sounds great to him. He loves a bed made out of hay and burlap.
I only buy the finest hay and burlap from Pier 1 Imports.
Now, we originally came up with the name Molly. Her name was registering was Robert. But because she had beardless features, kind of effeminate features, the other soldiers nicknamed her Molly.
So she registers as a 17-year-old boy. She's 5'7". 5'7". So she's tall for the age. And they start calling her Molly. If you're the soldier who started up that joke, that nickname, like, hey, we're going to call you Molly because you're effeminate, wouldn't you just be like pumping your fist when finally it's revealed that it actually is a woman?
No, I'm thinking about her sitting around the fire. They're cooking beans, and she's like, motherfucker.
It's like,
did you just say that out loud?
Right.
Now, she wasn't just an average soldier. It was said that she was stronger, shot better, and one of the big ones, because she was in a specialty unit, she was a really fast runner. So we're talking about some Wonder Woman here stuff. She was faster than men, taller than them, and could shoot better.
And as you mentioned, light infantry, that means they were tough, and they weren't moving with like pack horses and cannons. They were like trying to intercept other groups.
A great observation, Joe, and that's the thing. So they weren't as protected either. They weren't out back strategizing. They were going to the front, and they were carrying light gear, so they had to run for their lives and attack all the time. So she was in an elite unit of just the strong of the strong. So what today we'd consider special forces. It was a small group. It was only 50 to 60 were in.
Okay. I saw lots of headlines that listed her as part of George Washington's light infantry, so she really took a hand in what was happening.
Do you think she held her own?
I'm going to assume from what she accomplishes later, but I'm going to let you sort of reveal that as we go, if you're okay with that.
Absolutely.
So what was what was Deborah going to get out of this? What's the goal of modern bravery?
Well, one thing too, she wasn't going to ever advertise that she was a woman, right?
That's what I'm saying is at the end of the day, if she managed to pull off what she was doing, she would never get credit for anything that she was doing. Like it's not like the tribal reasons for bravery, like where you come back with land and prestige. If she did well in what she was doing, she comes back with nothing.
It's all stripped from her and all cheapened. Yeah. She might have even been jailed in those days, right? Her stakes were high. She was just literally a warrior patriot.
Yeah, the first risk she actually was taking was getting caught. We kind of want to answer the question, what does it take to become Molly? What does it take for us to become Deborah Sampson, now that we know that her real name is, Deborah, and what her past was? There's a lot of misinformation about courage. And one of the things that we want to cover from these articles is it is something you can teach. In fact, I very much doubt that as, a 5-year-old, Deborah was that brave. No doubt she was brave. You can kind of see that in kids when, the fearless kid is willing to dive off the couch and the other one's kind of crawling around in the corner, coloring on books and things like that.
The one climbs over the fence, shoplifts, the other kids tell on him.
Right, exactly, yeah. We oftentimes hear that courage is sort of the cornerstone of leadership. that courage is the willingness to act in the face of fear and uncertainty and doubt. And we kind of hold that up as like, if you're in the business world, courage is, the person who leads sales. Courage is the person who is willing to speak out at the board table. Courage is the person who's willing to put oneself out there when you're meeting new groups of people, that you're willing to say, hey, welcome to the group, welcome to the team. But you can train yourself to do all of that. That is the biggest takeaway from this episode, is you just have to sort of frame courage in your mind. And there are steps you can do. We've mentioned in episodes before that some people are born, one term we used in an episode was worrier or warrior. So how would you feel if we go through sort of the 4 or 5 steps we can take to be braver?
I want to be braver in all my affairs.
Okay. We know this from a past episode that visualization, it is oftentimes used in sort of holistic, nonsensical self-help, but it really helps when it comes to motivating yourself to take a different attack or take a different frame of mind. So one of the voluntary acts you can take to become more brave, clearly picture your actions and the positive results that will come from it. Visualization is really a powerful tool to emotionally motivate yourself, and that totally counts toward courage too. Another way to do it, and I very much suspect this was more of Deborah's speed, focus on the meaning of your actions. So we talk about writing about your values. I highly suspect that Deborah, because so much of these not documentaries, but these biographies about her really sort of stress that she was motivated by values. So you can pull that trick too. You can ask yourself why you're doing something, what values are going into something, why you chose in the first place to attempt something, and it will remind you to be a little bit braver. If you are at work and you are kicking yourself for not speaking up, just remind yourself, you're not there specifically for the paycheck. You're there to accomplish something too. You're motivating yourself to be braver because you want to actually improve yourself. So the little moments you let pass because you weren't brave enough in that little moment, just remind yourself of your values. One big one, especially in creative work, is embrace the courage to fail. Sometimes, and this isn't just about rejection, but you may want to set out with the idea that you can fail, that it's totally okay, and that especially if you're doing it in a safe environment, like it's an experiment, that might be the best way to treat things, because then you can have the courage to fail. I don't know about you, Todd, but whenever I go to public speaking or whenever I go to, especially classes, I treat any class like it's a laboratory, like I'm ready to throw things out and fail if I want to. And some of the best stuff that I write or come up with comes from intentional failure almost.
Kind of read my mind on this. Both of us being public speakers, what would you run these 4 through if we were just using that? Because that's something that a majority of people, even people who are great speakers or great leaders, very successful, are deathly, they're afraid of that, real close with death. How would you run it through these 4 steps?
If I were going and just taking these step by step, I would start whatever I was attempting by visualizing the results I want. I would think, I want to accomplish this creative task. I want to give this speech in front of everybody. I want to give a presentation.
So you're up on stage, and all the people that you love and all the people you look up to are watching you. They're cheering you. They're thanking you when you get off stage.
Right. And then I would focus on why I was there. So the meaning of my actions. I would say, I am here to try to educate, and I am also here to learn. And those are the 2 biggest reasons, and have fun. But the 2 values of mine are mostly education.
if you had a cause, it'd be like raising $500,000 for this cause that means a lot to you, it means a lot to your family, it means a lot to your community.
Yes, and it can absolutely be family oriented. It can be selfish. It just, you have to know what your value is. And then if I were doing this, I would focus on the meaning of my actions. And the why for me is oftentimes, this is the step I take toward being able to learn and to grow. And then finally, the courage to fail. I would, unless it is absolutely, a literal movie make or break moment, then I will treat it like a laboratory. I will treat it like this is another experiment.
As someone myself who has wet their pants and haven't been able to speak at a speech contest, I have failed. Let me tell you, it's not that great. It's not all you make it cracked up to be.
Have you seen? I think we've talked about this before. There's on Netflix, you can watch a video of Richard Pryor, who at this point was like a world famous comedian. Everyone loved him. He had movies out. And there's a video of him. It's an hour long. I think it's an hour long. It's him doing comedy at a comedy club. He sits up there with a clipboard or like a pack of paper, and he's just trying out jokes. And everybody in the club, you can tell they know him. They know all his material. They're waiting to hear the funniest stuff they've ever heard. And he sits there and just joke after joke, he bombs. Like he experiments the whole way. And
that's a man that everyone thinks that every word he says is funny.
Exactly. And he jokes with the crowd about how badly he's doing. He bombs a joke really badly. Everyone's got this sour sound, like they just ate a lemon head, and he's like, nope, that was a bad one. And then he just scratches it off his page.
And that's always encouraging to me when people who I see as can't do anything wrong have failed. It always makes me feel better that I have a chance.
Right, exactly. So, and they're doing our number 4, and I'm just going to skip right to that. Strengthen your pattern of bravery. So all these things we talked about, Todd saying, let's take this, by the numbers. What does this look like in action? That's exactly what you should do. You practice these in step. And I'm sure Deborah Sampson had lots of moments where like she had to raid Tory houses. I'm sure she went through these steps one after another every time she, went on a raid or did training to do this.
And your pattern of bravery is we get better at the things we work on.
Yes.
Okay. Deborah had nothing but problems in her young life, Joe. It was September of 1782, and she was gone. She was serving now, fighting the Revolutionary War. But because of what she tried to do before, of enlist under a man's name, everyone found out about it. Everybody gossiped about it, about her earlier attempt to enlist.
Mm-hmm.
And she got excommunicated from her church.
Holy shit.
Now, nowadays, that might not be a lot. But, Joe, as you know, back in those days, being shunned, I mean, the church was the community, right?
That is absolute social death.
Well, her church considered her loose and unchristian-like.
Harsh words. Okay.
The kind of women I used to date before my wife, right? Okay. So Deborah was assigned a very dangerous job. She was a scout. And so that's putting yourself out in front of everybody else, looking for the enemy. So Joe, I want you to envision this. This 5'7", fastest woman, Special Forces elite, she's out in front. She's counting how many British people there are. And then she goes back and tells George Washington.
That is wild dangerous because in this era, if you can see them, they can see you.
And you're as good as dead, right? Well, and we might all be speaking English if it wasn't for her. Not our English, but that annoying British.
Right. Nasally.
Yeah. Okay. In 1782, Deborah had some real danger when her and 2 sergeants led an expedition of 30 infantrymen, and they led into a confrontation with the British Tories.
Now, when you say confrontation, this wasn't like SEAL Team 6 busting into a house. This was back in like rank musket ball firing days, where you had to basically create a wall of bullets to actually hit anything. So
and
this
want to
usually
be in the front
leads
row.
to hand.
You want to be in the front row for some reason. It's
Right.
I'm making quotation thing here. It's an honor.
Right. So she's not in these ranks that she is like busting in on houses to catch Tories. So like they are oftentimes fighting hand to hand, face to face.
Oh, they're nose to nose, stomach to stomach, hitting each other over their heads with rocks, stabbing each other with bayonets, all that.
Right.
Now, she also dug trenches, and there was a big war at the Siege of Yorktown, and she faced cannon fire. Now, Deborah, her major injury, she got a gash on the forehead from a sword. So this is that nose-to-nose fighting we're talking about. And she took 2 shots to her thighs during one of her very first battles. Now, she was afraid the doctor would discover and reveal who she was, but she took matters into her own hands. She grabbed a penknife and a sewing needle, and she removed one of the muskets from her leg. And the second musket was so deep, Joe, she tried to dig that fucker out too. She couldn't get to it. So she just sewed up over it, sewed the hole up.
Oh.
It's like lead poisoning. Could you imagine? When I was doing this research, I was looking at my thighs, and I'm like, there's no freaking way.
Right. And you look at the size of the musket balls back then, and you're trying to imagine that large of a metal object in there forever.
Propelled, ripping through your thresh and the muscles.
Yeah. So her sewing skills come in handy yet again.
She's limping around, I imagine. And she went on to fight in several more battles. And she was able to go undetected for almost 2 years.
Can I just imagine when she's sewing her leg up that she's like gritting her teeth. She's like, I'll show you loose and Christian-like.
Loose. That's my favorite part of this episode. That is so not loose.
No,
or Christian-like, right? It's supposed to be a hero.
I just love that insult. I don't know why.
Now, it was the summer of 1783, and Molly Sampson, she fell ill, and she was in Philadelphia. She was taken to the hospital, and she lost consciousness. Now, in these days, you go to the hospital, it's a real thing, right?
Right. And she had like a flu. Like it wasn't from the musket ball. It was just like she had like a flu.
Yeah, this was long after that, so she'd healed from that.
Okay.
And the doctor, of course, because she was passed out, she lost consciousness, so she couldn't really keep everybody away and say, I'm okay, I'm going to be okay, just give me some water. But for some reason, the doctor, his last name was Biney, he kept her secret. So That's been lost in history. Why? Maybe it's because she was a war hero. Maybe it's because she begged him. I don't know.
If this was I imagine probably what happened was, he figured out that she had done, she was who she was. She had done so many cool things and let it slide. I like to believe that she held him by the neck and told him, "You tell anybody." from her sick bed.
Get stitches.
Right, exactly.
Well, don't be too big on this Dr. Bonnie. He had a change of heart, and he informed her superior officers who she really was. So maybe he was trying to protect her.
Okay, well that actually, we're not going to interpret his motives, but that's possible. It could have been he didn't tell on her because she was brave, but also, maybe he wanted to get her out of combat or something. Who knows?
Or he scolded her, "You're loose and unchristian."
Yeah, that could be it too. Yeah. Ooh. So we teased at the very beginning of the episode. We're going to answer the question: who is more brave, men or women?
Women.
Women.
I'm just going to say it because I'm afraid of all the women in my life.
You're afraid of what the studies find. I'm going to interpret a little bit of this. I'm just going to tell you what Psychology Today wrote, and then I'm going to sort of like talk a little bit about the 4 metrics of bravery we mentioned at the start of the episode. So this comes from researchers Selwyn Becker and Alice Eagley. And they kind of went through and they looked at rates of heroism among men and women. And they didn't just look at guts and glory kind of heroism, like charge into battle with a bayonet. they're not looking at Rambo. They're actually looking at people who saved lives of Jews during the Holocaust, people who joined the Peace Corps, numbers of people who donate kidneys overseas, people who serve as doctors of the world, people who have won Carnegie medals. So they really try to cover as many places where, like, you could consider it brave because it wasn't purely gaining land resources and reproductive rights. And they found out that of these things, women were more likely to donate kidneys. Like, they donate 60% of all kidneys, despite the fact that they make up 51% of the population.
That takes bravery, Joe, because you think maybe I'm going to die from this surgery, or something's going to happen after. I'm going to need that thing back, and I can't get it back. No return policy on those things.
Right, exactly. It's not a low risk. Women were also the majority recipients for the Righteous Among Nations Award for people who lent a hand during the Holocaust. And they were disproportionately more likely to volunteer for organizations that put themselves at risk. I am just going to say that based on our 4 early metrics of bravery, we talked about, is James Bond brave? You know, he's confident, he's suave, he has this giant bucket of skills and knows he can do everything on the battlefield. This is not that. When we talk about bravery, we're talking about these are people who did not know what the outcome would be, and they took the risk anyway, and it was altruistic without, receiving something tribally. So basically across the board from what we could see, when it comes to volunteering, risking oneself to donate an organ, and getting into organizations that help others at risk, it seems like women come out pretty much on top. Not by a huge margin, but large enough to be pretty clear about this. We always want to mention on the show when we discount a study. So we ran into one by the BBC where they talked about how women live longer and are thus better survivors.
That kind of makes sense, doesn't it?
It does.
Who lives the most days is the queen.
Right. They talk about in this study, they mention the Irish potato famine and eras where diseases were a problem and famines were a problem. But there's something that I took out of the study, and I picked this up from reading The Red Queen's Race by Matt Ridley. Testosterone is an immunosuppressant. So the reason we didn't use the study is because women have a higher rate of surviving during an outbreak or a plague, and they are better survivors. However, it's partly because men's testosterone means that they have a crappier immune system. A plague happens, the big muscle-bound dude who's walking through the room who has high testosterone, he's more likely to keel over from a cold. Or infection, more likely. One thing that a study that was in this, by the way, when I say our study, I really do mean our show writer today, Amber Dean. One of the ones she found that I liked a lot was there's a Gallup poll that was characteristics that are more associated with women than with men. So this is just them polling Americans or people and asking which words do they associate with which genders. Characteristics strongly associated with women with a large margin. When somebody says the word emotional, both men and women put women down in that category. So to 87%. When people say affectionate, that's 81% women. Talkative, people associate women as talkative, 68%. And patient, 53%. When you get to creative, it becomes even, 50-50. Aggressiveness, they start putting women down at 48%, meaning they think men are more aggressive. Courageous, this is the one we want to get to. 23% of people associate courageous with women.
That's so low.
The rest of that number is tilted toward men. So when we talk about, do we think of bravery? we think of bravery being a male category. We think of bravery being a male word.
The police officers, the firefighters, and the military dominated thought.
Right, exactly. But like we said, like that is looking at it like those are James Bond bravery. That police officer, that firefighter. I mean, a lot of them are women, but the men we associate with that role, they've been trained, they have the skill set, they're James Bonding it. They are doing it because they have those 3 markers of bravery.
But women physicians who travel to Afghanistan and help children with no backup, no support, not knowing, and sometimes they terrorists find them and kill them.
Right.
True courageous, true bravery.
So that's the answer that officially I'm taking, and I don't know if you'll agree with me. I'm saying, to my money, bravery is doing something you may not have the skill set for, but you emotionally have to overcome something to do.
That's officially the view of the re-engineered you.
All right. So our doctor turned in Deborah. He clearly associated the word courage with men more than women, like our study shows. I assume she was immediately arrested for being a loose, unchristian-like person.
Well, that's what she was afraid of. So instead of getting a Purple Heart or Medal of Honor like you would today for everything she did her service, she would probably have been awarded a field general if she was around today. But she was afraid she was going to go to jail. But instead, October 23rd, 1783, she was honorably discharged from the Army, likely because of her extraordinary service.
All right.
And then she went on to have what I guess you would consider a normal life. She married a man named Benjamin Gannett, and they were together, and they had 3 children: Earl, Mary, and I like this one, Patience.
Do you think Benjamin, like when she got married to him, he must have known her past? So is he just like anything you say?
I think she just pointed at him at church and said, I think she proposed to him. Yeah. Is that what you say? You proposed?
You go up to Benjamin and be like, do you know how many men I've killed?
But she didn't get down on her knee.
Right.
Now, she was actually given a small pension for her service in the Army and for the wounds. I guess you get money per wound back in those days.
Okay.
Now, Paul Revere talked to Deborah, pushed her. He wanted her to use her fame and her service to help make money as a lecturer. And she took her advice. She started lecturing, public speaking, motivational speaking in Massachusetts, New York, and Rhode Island. So all throughout the Northeast.
That is awesome.
She was one of the earliest female lecturers to go on a national lecture tour in the United States.
How have I not heard of her before? She's talking to George Washington. She gets advice from Paul Revere. She's a lecturer.
That's what I mean. All the American history we've studied, and this should be a blockbuster movie, especially with, equality towards women and everything. You think this would be at the top of the list.
Right.
Now, Sampson was struggling for money, and she actually borrowed a lot of money from her friend, Paul Revere. That's crazy, huh? I know George Washington and Paul Revere. Ultimately, her and Paul petitioned the government for a military pension. And with him leaning on him, what a great friend, she received in 1805, making her the only woman to earn a full military pension for her participation in the Revolutionary War. And with the money, she was able to refurbish her family property and live out her days as a farmer.
When you say movie, that is a perfect movie end. Like, that is exactly what you want. As she goes back home, she owns it, and yeah, she's got that pension.
She died at a pretty young age, at 66. She died of yellow fever.
Okay.
Now, her tombstone, Joe, this is what it reads. On one side, it reads, Deborah, wife of Benjamin Gannett, dies April 29th, 1827. Now, on the reverse side, Deborah Sampson Gannett, Robert Shurtleff, the Female Soldier Service, 1781 to 1783. Now, if you want to pay your respects and thank Deborah Sampson for her service, you can. There is a statue of her at the Sharon, Massachusetts Public Library.
At that same library, you can buy quills, and you can practice your feminine style of holding those quills if you'd like. I'm kidding. Don't do that.
Being brave is something every single one of us has inside of us innately, because bravery is cultivated from the anterior cingulate cortex in the brain. And, well, we all have a brain. In biology terms, bravery emerges from the primal struggle we have. When we find ourselves in a dangerous situation, our amygdala sends a signal to our prefrontal cortex, inadvertently interfering with our ability to reason clearly, sending you either face first into battle or running for the hills. If you're not a natural warrior, you don't have to succumb to fear. With a little bit of brain training and muscle memory, you can chase down those Tories or challenge your boss for a raise. Because when you train your brain to confront scary things repeatedly, you are reprogramming your amygdala to send the same signal to your basal ganglia instead, a region of the brain that doesn't give shit about fear. This kind of reprogramming, by repetition, by the way, is basically what the Army does for their soldiers. Men and women can both be courageous. In mainstream, bravery is represented as a masculine trait, stereotyped, even as demonstrating manliness, fearlessness, and masculine impulsivity. But according to the lay theory, gender doesn't play a significant role in risk-taking or social courage. There's no denying some people have a higher threshold for risk-taking than others. We are not all Deborah Sampson, going undercover to be in the front lines. We are not all built to want to face death. Not all of us plan to go down with the ship, and that's fine. If that's what you're into, you don't even need to wear a disguise to see combat, thanks to modern laws. For the rest of us who just want to feel a little more comfortable confronting our boss, our pushy neighbor, or our mother-in-law, it's just a matter of repetition and practice. You've been listening to The Re-Engineered You. Thank you so much for listening to the show. You mean the world to us. We have a new episode every week.
You can connect with us at www.re-engineeredyou.com. That's where we have research links, show notes, and articles for each of our episodes. We also appreciate feedback, and we love spirited debate.
We're not experts in anything, but we've got an opinion on everything.